Lesson 2: Philosophical Reflection and the Search for Truth. Audio recorded by Mr. Vidal. This is patently absurd, but whoever wishes to become a philosopher must learn not to be frightened by absurdities. Bertrand Russell. Philosophical Reflection and the Search for Truth. People are often faced with different situations wherein they need to solve problems or make important decisions. There are many questions that need to be answered, actions that need to be done, and decisions to be made. All people, young or old, want to find out which of the solutions, decisions, answers, or actions would be the wisest and most reasonable. Doing this demands a lot of thinking because the choices made, the right way, the proper method, the appropriate approach could result in success or failure, satisfaction or frustration, contentment or despair. People often make a quick decision only to find out in the end that it was not the right one. Sometimes people act hastily without thinking of the possible consequences or carefully evaluating a situation beforehand. Oftentimes, they are impatient. There is a saying that goes, "Haste makes waste." Thus, it is important to observe, analyze, and evaluate a particular situation first before doing any kind of action. Since people are rational beings, they need to use their power of reason so that they can be properly guided and informed in their choice of actions and decisions. Through this ability to reason, people find the right solution, make the wise decision, get the correct answer, and take the most reasonable course of action. However, an untrained mind can only be successful to a certain degree. The need for a trained and skilled mind becomes necessary as the problem becomes complex. The question turns out to be more difficult. The decision to be made becomes more crucial, and the action that needs to be done becomes more critical. A more skilled and trained mind is needed to perform higher order mental processes.
Welcome to the MCAT Multimedia Series and to MCAT's Introduction to Philosophy. Philosophy is the study of fundamental questions about the nature of reality, human existence, knowledge, values, and beauty. The term philosophy stems from ancient Greek. It literally means love of wisdom. Philosophers seek wisdom because they want to know how to live a good life, what happiness really consists of, what is right and wrong, and how to best run a society. All these questions fall under the branch of philosophy called ethics. To answer such ethical questions, philosophers try to understand what human beings are. They look at what makes us different from other things, and at what the nature of reality is really like. They ask, what is there, and is there a God? And these problems are termed metaphysics. Of course, it's really not that simple. In order to claim any knowledge about reality, about oneself, or what is right and wrong, philosophers also investigate how we really know something, and how real knowledge differs from mere opinion. This is the domain known as epistemology. Although science now offers its own answers to some of these conundrums, philosophy still addresses questions that everyone at some point thinks about. Working out how to live a good, rewarding life, and how to relate to other people and the world we live in. These are timeless problems that concern us all. The Macat Library traces the ways in which these questions have been studied, from the distant past into the present. The earliest surviving works to address the great questions are Plato's. In The Republic, he suggests that reality ultimately consists of ideas or forms, and that the form of the good and the beautiful illuminates everything else, something we can discover, he adds in Symposium, by falling in love. Plato's pupil Aristotle presents in Metaphysics a subtly modified theory of the world, in which every object is comprised of both form and matter, and change is to be understood as things taking on their proper form or losing it. In Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle applies his metaphysics to human life and argues that humans realize their essence by governing life through reason and engaging in pure contemplative activity. In other words, by living the life of a true philosopher. One thing that philosophers do especially well is to follow arguments to their logical conclusions. Taking this course can radically transform the way in which we see the world. In his critique of pure reason, Immanuel Kant argues that the world we know depends in part on the functioning of our own minds. The world as it is in itself, though, Kant insists, is something we cannot know anything about, an idea that Hegel tried hard to disprove in his Phenomenology of Spirit. Other philosophers have dedicated themselves to resolving some of the other fundamental problems of existence, such as the question, am I more than just my body? Descartes reflects in his Meditations on the relation between mind and body, and concludes that they must be completely distinct entities, a dualism, and a concept that many philosophers continue to wrestle with today, and that Gilbert Ryle vigorously challenges in The Concept of Mind. So studying philosophy can be confrontational, but it can also lead to deep understanding of the human condition. Friedrich Nietzsche asks us why we would continue to live if God does not exist and everything is ultimately meaningless. In Beyond Good and Evil, he challenges us to create our own values to make life worth living. Soren Kierkegaard, on the other hand, suggests in Sickness Unto Death that the only solution to human despair is to make a leap of faith and affirm the existence of God. Socrates, the founding father of Western philosophy, declared that an unexamined life is not worth living. Macat is your guide to an examined life and to the ideas of the greatest philosophers. Come inside to find out more. Macat. Learn better, think smarter, aim higher.
Let's have a recap of the definition of philosophy. Philosophy is the joining of two Greek words, philos or philien, which means love, and sophia, which generally means wisdom. Taken together, this means that philos sophia is the love of wisdom. What is love of wisdom? We can best appreciate this by recalling the story of Socrates, whose life and death is a moving picture of this love.
Hello everyone, welcome to PHILO Notes. This is our daily whiteboard where we will be discussing relevant topics in philosophy every single day. And for our very first edition, I will present the definition of philosophy and briefly discuss its major branches. But specifically, I will address the question, what is philosophy? Now, I would like to start off with its etymological definition. So, philosophy, particularly Western philosophy, comes from the two Greek words philia, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Thus, etymologically speaking, philosophy means the love of wisdom. As is well known, love in this context is understood as a strong desire for a particular object, while wisdom is understood as a correct application of knowledge. Thus, philosophy, as the love of wisdom, at least in this context, could refer to the strong desire of the human person to possess knowledge and apply it correctly. So, it's not a coincidence, therefore, that most philosophers in the ancient world, particularly in Greece, India, and China, were sages or wise men. Think, for example, of Socrates, Gautama Buddha, Confucius, and Lao Tzu. Traditionally, however, philosophy is defined as a science that studies beings and their ultimate causes, reasons, and principles through the aid of human reason alone. And when we speak of being or beings in philosophy in this context, we mean all things that exist, material or immaterial. An example of beings are stones, trees, persons, cars, air, water, and the notions of God, soul, and or spirit. All of these are beings, and philosophy studies their ultimate causes, reason, and principles through the aid of human reason alone. In other words, philosophy is concerned with the reason and principles that account for everything that exists. Thus, some of the basic questions in philosophy are: what is the origin of the world, of everything that exists? Why do these things exist, rather than not exist at all? And is there God? If so, how can we justify the goodness of God in the face of evil? And what is the meaning and purpose of life? Why do we have to suffer? And if one is suffering from an unbearable pain such as cancer, is it morally right to resort to euthanasia or assisted suicide? These are just some of the questions that philosophy attempted to address. And in doing so, philosophy uses reason as a tool which can be expressed in many forms, such as the ability to reflect, question, articulate one's thought, and analyze certain phenomena or events. In short, philosophy attempts to understand things in a critical and logical manner. It is important to note, however, that philosophers do not agree on a single definition of philosophy. In fact, philosophers differ in their basic understanding of philosophy. For example, Karl Jaspers, a famous German existential philosopher, understands philosophy as a discipline in which questions are more important than answers, because answers themselves will in turn become questions. After addressing the question, what is philosophy, I will now proceed and discuss its major branches. So basically, philosophy is divided into four major branches, namely metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and ethics. Metaphysics comes from the two Greek words meta, which means beyond or after, and physica, which means physical or nature. Hence, etymologically speaking, metaphysics means the study of things beyond the physical, that is, concepts or things that cannot be experienced, such as the concepts of God, freedom, and soul. Metaphysics is commonly understood as the foundation of philosophy. In fact, Aristotle calls it the first philosophy. Originally, the Greek word metaphysica, which literally means after physics, actually designated that part of Aristotle's works, which came after those chapters that dealt with physics. However, it was misappropriated later by the medieval commentators on classical texts as that which is beyond the physical. Thus, over time, metaphysics has been understood as the study of that which exists beyond the physical. Now, metaphysics is further subdivided into two, namely general metaphysics and special metaphysics. General metaphysics is also referred to as ontology. And under special metaphysics, we have cosmology, psychology or anthropology, and natural theology or theodicy. As mentioned earlier, general metaphysics is also known as ontology. Ontology is derived from the two Greek words onto, which means being or that which is, that is, everything that exists, and logos, which means knowledge or study. Note, however, that the term logos in ancient Greek scholarship have different connotations. For example, Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher of the late 16th century BCE, understands logos as reason or the underlying principle of all that is. But going back, however, ontology, therefore, is the specific branch of philosophy that studies beings in their ultimate causes, reasons, and principles through the aid of reason alone. In other words, ontology studies the first principles or the essence of all things. So, some of the basic questions in ontology are: what is being? And why do things exist rather than not exist at all? And what is the meaning and nature of reality? Also, what is the underlying principle of all that exists? And is there nothing? Although these philosophical questions are mentioned in this edition, please note that our concern here is just to describe very schematically the four major branches of philosophy. And if you want to know more about the nature and dynamics of ontology per se, you may check out this resource. On the other hand, we have special metaphysics, which includes cosmology, psychology or anthropology, and natural theology or theodicy. And I will also briefly discuss each of these subcategories. Cosmology, from the ancient Greek words kosmos, which means the world, and logos, which means study, is the specific sub-branch of philosophy that studies the world or the universe, including its origin, dynamics, and characteristics, as well as the laws that govern its order. And some of the basic questions in cosmology are: what is the origin of the world? What is the basic material of which the world is formed? How do things arise? And in what consists its fundamental form or principle of order? And is the world or universe infinite? Next, we have psychology. Psychology comes from the two Greek words psyche, which means soul, but this is loosely understood as mind, and logos, meaning study. Thus, psychology is the specific sub-branch of philosophy that studies the soul or mind. Broadly construed, though, psychology is the study of the nature and the dynamics of the human person as a whole, with emphasis on the way the person's mind functions and the way she behaves. Some of the questions in psychology are: what is the nature of the human person? Is there such thing as human nature? And what is the meaning and purpose, if any, of life? And is there life after death? Now, how do we account for the existence of sufferings in the world? Lastly, we have theodicy or natural theology. Theodicy is derived from the Greek word theos, which means God. The word theodicy was coined by the famous 18th century German philosopher named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in his 1970 work titled Theodicy. Broadly construed, theodicy is the study of God, but specifically, theodicy is concerned with a justification of the goodness of God in the face of the existence of evil in the world. Some of the basic questions in theology are: is there God? What and who is God, if He exists at all? How do we prove the existence of God? And if God exists, how do we justify the existence of evil and suffering in the world? And does a belief in God really necessary? But then again, these are just brief descriptions of the subcategories of the special metaphysics. And for a detailed discussion on special metaphysics, you may refer to this material. Alright, I think I already have briefly described the first branch of philosophy called metaphysics. Now, let's move on to the second branch of philosophy, that is epistemology. Epistemology comes from the two Greek words episteme, which means knowledge, and logos, which means study. Thus, it is formally defined as the study of the nature and scope of knowledge and justified belief. Specifically, it analyzes the nature of knowledge and how it relates to similar notions, such as truth, belief, and justification. Here are some of the basic questions in epistemology. What is knowledge? What do we know? How is knowledge acquired? What are the structures and limits of knowledge? And what makes justified beliefs justified? For an in-depth discussion of epistemology, you can also check out this resource. The third major branch of philosophy is logic. Logic comes from the Greek word logos, which, as I already mentioned, has different meanings. However, I would stick to the definition that logic is the science of correct thinking or the study of the principles and criteria of valid argument. More specifically, logic attempts to distinguish sound or good reasoning from unsound and bad reasoning. The basic questions in logic includes the following: what distinguishes a good argument from a bad one? How can we detect a fallacy in an argument? What are the criteria in determining the validity of an argument? And what are the types of logic? Now, lastly, in the fourth major branch of philosophy, that is ethics. Ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which means custom or habit. Broadly construed, ethics is the morality of human actions. Ethics, therefore, is concerned with questions of how human persons ought to act, and the search for a definition of a right conduct and a good life. It is important to note that ethics is not the same with morality. This is because ethics denotes the theory of right action and the greater good, while morality indicates practice, that is, the rightness or wrongness of a human action. And here are some of the common questions in ethics. What is a right conduct as that which causes the realization of the greatest good? How do we determine a right conduct? In other words, what makes a right conduct right? And what is a good life, and can we attain it? What is the difference between human act and actions that are based on instinct? And what do people think is right? Alright, that's it for today. Keep looking forward to our series of daily whiteboard editions as we try to make the learning and understanding of philosophy incredibly easy. Thanks for joining us today in this edition of our daily whiteboard here at Philo Notes. I hope you find this material helpful, and if you do, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks. Take care.
Philosophical reflection. Philosophy offers certain ways or methods on how to deal with certain problems or situations. People encounter different problems, like the mundane concerns of day to day life and some trivial concerns like how to get to a certain destination. Philosophy deals with problems that affect living or human existence more than these concerns. These are problems that dictate the way people live their lives. It is because of this that one must practice philosophical reflection. Philosophical reflection is a more profound examination of the underlying meanings or causes of the problems regarding human existence. While we can ponder on how we can put food on our table, a more profound reflection will lead us to the realization why we need food and why we do not have food on the table in the first place. When one practices philosophical reflection, he or she examines his or her existence and practical issues in life. The ultimate end is to find the underlying meaning and the reason behind one's experiences in life. One of the benefits of practicing philosophical reflection is that people become critical thinkers. As critical thinkers, people understand clearly a particular situation and determine whether such situation presents a problem that needs an explanation or a practical solution. As critical thinkers, people may realize that a situation is not really a problem in itself, and its being a problem is only a matter of perception or attitude. The problem may not be a situation, but the people themselves. That is, how they view that situation or what their attitude is toward that situation. If a situation is indeed a problem, then critical thinkers are able to generate possible solutions. Critical thinkers are creative in the sense that they are able to think or create solutions to any kind of problems. From these solutions, people are able to evaluate the most appropriate, proper, and best solution to a problem. Elements of critical thinking. There are elements involved in philosophical reflection. These are the necessary mental attitudes and conceptual tools needed in order to philosophize. One needs to remember that one goal of philosophical reflection or philosophizing is to arrive at the truth and avoid error. In doing so, one becomes wiser than before. This discussion will relate philosophizing to critical thinking, since the philosopher is also a critical thinker. Instead of defining critical thinking, which is rather difficult given the different interpretations, we will then discuss the elements that constitute our practice of critical thinking. Elements of critical thinking: understanding, thinking by and for oneself, thinking proactively, being open minded, considering different perspectives, questioning and challenging beliefs. Understanding. One of the first elements of critical thinking is having a proper and clear understanding of a particular situation. To understand means to have a mental grasp of things, of reality, of issues at hand, or of the subject matter. One can more or less picture in his or her mind a situation or certain reality. For example, one easily understands that flame can cause fire and fire can burn things. One also understands certain issues like those which are political, social, and economic in nature. It is easy to understand that if the economy becomes bad, then people will be without jobs, and when people are jobless, then they will suffer. It is also easy to understand certain moral issues. For example, if people become bad or dishonest, then it will be difficult to trust others and live harmoniously with them. Philosophy is more concerned with more relevant situations. They affect one's social, political, moral, and spiritual life. This is why the discussion will focus on these matters. Understanding those relevant matters will include three elements: understanding the context, understanding the opposing views, and understanding the whole range of issues about a subject matter. Context. Context may be understood as the framework, the frame of reference, and the different connections and relationships within which something must be understood and interpreted. A context may be social, political, religious, economic, or scientific. An issue or a subject matter, therefore, must be understood and interpreted according to its context. Ang haba. If one does not understand the framework or connections of issues at hand, then he or she cannot make a full understanding and assessment or evaluation of such issues. For example, the Genesis account of creation can only be understood and appreciated in the context of a story about how God, in His power and love, created mankind and gave him or her dominion and responsibility over His creation. It should not be taken in a literal and scientific context. Another example is the position of the Church on abortion and capital punishment. These must be understood within a context of morality and sacredness of human life. If one does not understand the whole context of why abortion and capital punishment are not allowed, then one cannot have a full understanding of these issues. There is a common and normal tendency to react, respond, analyze, and criticize hastily without fully understanding the context, and the result could be disastrous. This could lead to commit serious errors or suffer embarrassment. Yun. Secondly, understanding includes knowing the opposite views, the opinions and ideas of others, and the contrary ideas. There are always at least two sides to one and the same coin, and there are always opposing views on every subject matter, issue, and in any discussion. To philosophize and think critically is also to know the opposing views or the contrary ideas. And once you understand the opposing views or contrary ideas, then you are in a better position to compare, respond, and analyze rightly and correctly. One of the pressing issues in our society is poverty, and there are opposing views about how to eradicate poverty. There are those who propose that we need to control the population, and there are also those who propose that we need to curb corruption because the cause of poverty is not the population, but the uneven distribution of resources because of corruption. There is a need to understand these different views. When we are able to do this, then we are in a better position to compare or criticize. The third element is understanding the whole subject matter, such as wide ranging issues. One must have a comprehensive understanding of the whole range of ideas, opinions, and views involved in the discussion of the subject matter. A particular topic or issue is also connected to other topics or issue. So, it is important to also have an understanding about how these topics or issues are interrelated. Oh, kaya niyo yun? Walang mali? Hirap nun ah. Thinking by and for oneself. The second element is using one's power or ability to think or reason out. When one makes decisions, reflects on his or her experiences, or evaluates a particular issue, he or she has to rely on his or her own power to think instead of having other people do the thinking for him or her. Philosophizing and thinking critically means making one's personal assessment and evaluation of the issues at hand and the surrounding information. Some people have the tendency to allow others to think for them or to simply follow what others think. They adopt others' thoughts and ideas, comply with other people's wishes without first doing personal reflection. There is a common tendency for some people to simply agree and blindly follow the dictates of others. Ganon. It is true that many of the beliefs that one adheres to have been shaped by his or her experiences. While young, one would usually adopt the views of others like his or her parents, siblings, teachers, and community leaders. One's thinking is usually influenced by other people's views. Aside from this, one is also influenced by other media. But as a person matures, he or she acquires his or her own views and beliefs independent of the beliefs and views of others. So, instead of simply accepting the views of others, people have developed the ability to examine a society's belief system and views, which have shaped one's young mind, and see for themselves whether they are proper, true, and adequate or not. Of course, it does not mean that one will always end up changing his or her views and beliefs. He or she might, in fact, accept and validate these old beliefs and views using her own thinking and reason. Ganon. Thinking proactively. Philosophizing and critical thinking are examples of proactive thinking. Philosophical reflection and critical thinking also requires that one be proactive in his or her own way of thinking. In proactive thinking, one uses his or her own intelligence, knowledge, and abilities in order to deal with different situations, issues, and subject matters. Thinking proactively means that one has to think in advance and anticipate certain consequences of his or her actions. It means getting involved in useful and meaningful endeavors and tasks instead, or remaining passive and indifferent. When one thinks proactively, he or she takes the initiative in making decisions on his or her own instead of waiting passively to be told of what to do or think. To think proactively means to commit oneself to the endeavors or tasks at hand instead of giving up when difficulties arise and taking responsibility for the consequences of one's actions and decisions. Many problems keep recurring because one hardly anticipates them. He or she only reacts and moves when the problem occurs. one hardly thinks of what will happen in the future. Some philosophers are regarded as prophetic, not only because they can foretell or foresee the future, but rather because they have the ability to anticipate something before it happens. Instead of waiting for the problem to come, they try to think of consequences of certain things happening or if one does a certain action. Yon. Being open minded. Philosophical reflection and critical thinking also require having an open mind. The philosopher or critical thinker is open to the ideas and opinions of others. One does not have the monopoly of ideas, much less of good ideas. There are good ideas and thoughts one can learn from others, other sources, new experiences, and other encounters with other people. Some people tend to cling so tightly to their ideas and views that they can no longer see, learn, and accept new ideas. To philosophize is to be open to new views, new interpretations, and new concepts. Of course, this does not mean that one should accept outright the new ideas or concepts presented to him or her. Philosophizing means that one welcomes new ideas as other interpretations or view of one's own ideas or a probable source of new knowledge. It is for him or her to decide whether or not to accept these ideas and information. When a person closes his or her mind to other ideas, he or she denies himself, herself, of new knowledge. This hinders one's intellectual growth. Learning and growth will not stop unless one closes his or her mind to new realities. Every day, new realities emerge, new things are learned, and new concepts are understood. Being open minded, therefore, is a proper mental attitude. Nagkambulol-bulol pa ako. Considering different perspectives. Openness of mind leads one to the next element of philosophical reflection and critical thinking, which is considering different paths that lead to the truth. Philosophical reflection requires that one considers different possibilities and perspectives. This means that being open to the different paths to the truth is being open to new perspectives and views. It is like opening new windows through which one can see new things or probably the same things but in a new light and perspective. While it is important to think for oneself, he or she has to consider the fact that others may have good ideas or better ideas which people can learn and benefit from. Remember that a critical thinker is a person who is willing to listen and examine carefully the views of others. This belief represents only one view or perspective. There are definitely other viewpoints that are equally important and need to be taken into consideration in order to have a more complete understanding of a situation or subject matter. When a person applies this mental attitude to a higher level of understanding, he or she finds out that there may just be one truth after all. Certainly, there are different paths or avenues to the truth, and no one can claim that he or she has the exclusive position of the way to the truth or that his or her way is the only way. This is not to say that when one opens himself or herself to new possibilities, what he or she will see and encounter are the good and the beautiful concepts and ideas. One may encounter bad ideas, insignificant concepts, irrational views, and false principles. But how will he or she knows these ideas and concepts or views if he or she does not open his or her mind to all of them? Opening one's mind to these possible views and ideas does not mean accepting them as true and correct. It just means one is willing to explore other possibilities. Nagbabakil pa ako. Questioning and challenging beliefs. Philosophical reflection and critical thinking also involve questioning and challenging beliefs. Sometimes people think of questioning in a negative way. They sometimes interpret questioning as outright opposition or a radical opposition to a new idea or thought. Questioning can become a means to contradict a different view without any basis or reason. This is rather a destructive type of questioning. However, there is also a constructive type of questioning. To question constructively is to simply ask for clarification or a reconfirmation of an old interpretation that has been accepted or believed in. It means going back to the real issue or the original interpretation and clarifying whether such interpretation or ideas or beliefs are indeed right and correct. Critical thinking does not stop with constructive questioning. The philosopher or critical thinker must challenge other people's ideas or beliefs. If it is discovered or established after constructive questioning that such idea or belief or principle or theory is not correct or false and without reason and meaning, then the critical thinker is duty to bound to oppose or to challenge it as its correctness, truth, value, and significance. Bulol pa ako. From these elements of critical thinking, there are few things that one needs to remember. First, philosophical reflection and critical thinking can be understood as an active, purposeful, clear, organized, and self initiated cognitive process. Second, it will ultimately result to a proper understanding of things and issues and conceiving and formulating clear ideas and concepts. Third, through philosophical reflection and critical thinking, people are able to make true and accurate judgments and decisions and arrive at valid arguments, acceptable justifications, and lastly, it allows people to use sound reason and achieve their goals and purpose. When people are able to do this, then critical thinking further results to freedom and the liberation from ignorance, blind adherence, and thoughtless conformism. Pilosopo as philosopher. Here in the Philippines, the term Pilosopo connotes the image of a comical and sometimes annoying character. It is often used to describe someone who plays with words or twists commonsensical reasonings in order to come across as funny.
Socrates is considered one of the founders of Western philosophy, but you might not have guessed that from his early life. Socrates was born to a working-class family in ancient Greece around 470 BC. His father was a sculptor who cut stone for the Parthenon and taught Socrates the stone-cutting trade. As an adult, Socrates worked as a stonemason, as well as serving in the military during 3 campaigns. It wasn't until he retired that Socrates took up the occupation he is best known for: teaching. What are the great works of Socrates everyone should read? Well, there aren't any. Socrates did not write. What we know of Socrates comes from the works of his students, Plato and Xenophon, as well as the playwright Aristophanes, who was a contemporary of Socrates. This is sometimes referred to as the Socrates problem. We know about Socrates only through second-hand accounts. The Socrates problem is compounded by the nature of the writing from this time. There is very little of what we would consider histories written during the classic era. Rather, they are mostly dramatized works, plays, and philosophical dialogues. For instance, in Aristophanes' play, The Clouds, Socrates is depicted as a swindler who teaches his students clever acts of deception. But that was a satirical comedy, so should we believe that depiction? Plato said the play was slanderous. By contrast, Plato's and Xenophon's works presented a kinder portrayal of Socrates' character, but even their accounts differ in many particulars. We are left to piece together what the man was like, finding common ground in the various depictions. Socrates' reputation as a towering intellect began when one of his followers made a pilgrimage to the Oracle of Delphi. This was a priestess at the temple of Apollo who served as a medium through which the god of Apollo spoke. People traveled from all over Europe to hear her prophecies. The oracle proclaimed no one was wiser than Socrates. When Socrates heard this statement, he took it to be a puzzle. He set out to find who was the wisest man. He interviewed the people of Athens who were most admired for their wisdom, teachers, politicians, artists. But he concluded that they all had a fatal flaw. These men all believed they knew a great deal, but were ignorant of what they did not know. Socrates said that he was as ignorant as any other man, with the very slight advantage that he at least knew he was ignorant. And in that way, he was the wisest of an entire population of ignorant people. Socrates said, "What I do not know, I do not think I know." This is referred to as the Socrates paradox. It may surprise you that Socrates, the wisest man in Athens, was not known for expounding and making speeches. Rather, he would ask questions, question after question, to pin down what did someone actually know. Often, logical inconsistencies in the answers would point out faulty lines of reason. In this way, both the teacher and student were led to knowledge. This was a new form of discourse that came to be known as the Socratic method. It is still used to this day as one of the most successful teaching methods ever found. Sadly, this habit of pointing out people's mistakes in reasoning may have won Socrates few friends in Athens. It didn't help matters that he was also unappealing in appearance. In Plato's Symposium, Socrates is described as quite unattractive, short and stocky with bulging, staring eyes. He was said to have odd religious views as well. What might have been the final straw was Aristophanes' play The Clouds, which suggested that Socrates was associated with the Sophists. This was a group of teachers whom older generations feared were teaching the youth to be wild and disrespectful. In the end, his list of offenses grew too long. Socrates was charged with being an atheist and corrupting the youth of Athens. Socrates represented himself in the trial. As described in Plato's Apology and Xenophon's Apology of Socrates to the jury, Socrates denied being a sophist and gave evidence of his attempts to encourage virtue and elevated behavior from Athenians. But in true Socratic fashion, he did not try to win over the jury, but rather point out how poor their thinking was. The jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. In Athens at this time, convicted criminals could propose an alternative to their punishments. Socrates jokingly suggested that he instead be given free meals at the Prytaneum, an honor reserved for the most admired citizens of Athens. The jury was not amused. Socrates' followers wept and encouraged him to flee, which was not an unusual occurrence at these sorts of trials. But as if to dramatically win his argument that he always obeyed the rule of law, Socrates went to his death with no outward appearance of fear. He willingly drank the cup of deadly hemlock that was the means of his execution. He was 70 years old. Athens had put to death the man Plato called the wisest and most just of all men. Socrates the man may have died, but his ideas lived on through his disciples. The writings of Plato and Xenophon brought their teacher back to the world. Socrates' philosophy continued to be studied through the Middle Ages and reached a new peak during the Renaissance. To this day, the Socratic method is used by teachers everywhere to find out what you know and what you don't know. For our part, we strive to honor his memory at Socratica.
Philosophical reflection and problem solving. One can also apply philosophical reflection to his or her practical concerns, such as everyday problems. Problem solving is not just executing a well learned response or a series of behaviors. It is also distinct from learning new behaviors which could happen unconsciously or without due deliberation. Problem-solving behavior generally involves five logical steps or stages. 1. Representing or defining the problem. 2. Generating possible solutions. 3. Evaluating solutions. 4. Applying the solutions. 5. Critiquing given solution through dialectics. Representing or defining the problem. This involves a thorough understanding and comprehension of the problem and its cause. The first step is to determine whether or not the situation presents a problem. A problem is a break, disruption, or distortion of the normal flow of things, or when the desired objective or goal cannot be attained. If you want to attain a certain objective and cannot attain it, there is a break or disruption. The disruption or break is the very problem. We differentiate the problem, the break, from the cause of the problem, the one causing the break or disruption. For example, you normally talk to your parents about certain things, like asking for permission to go out with your friends. All of a sudden, on a particular situation, you cannot ask permission from them. Thus, you cannot go out with your friends. This is an example of a problem. The problem here is you cannot go to your parents to ask for their permission to go out with your friends. This is how you come to understand a problem. You need to think of what caused the problem. Why are you not able to talk to your parents and ask for their permission? Is it because you think your parents will not listen to you or not permit you? Or is it because you are afraid of being refused? What you are actually trying to do in this case is to conceptualize the problem in familiar terms. By understanding the nature of the problem and its cause, you can better solve it. The manner by which the problem is represented in your mind will significantly influence the ease with which possible solutions can be generated. If there is a clear understanding of the problem and the cause or causes, then clear possible solutions can be generated. Understanding a problem depends on how it presents itself to you. Sometimes, the cause of the problem is just the attitude of the person. In other words, the cause of the problem could be objective or subjective. And if this is misunderstood, then that could affect the next step, which is generating possible solutions. Generating possible solutions. The next step is to generate possible solutions to the problem. This involves divergent thinking. In divergent thinking, one thinks of possible solutions to the problem. He or she either recalls past solutions or invents new ones. His or her mind or thoughts diverges along a number of different paths. Thus, it is called divergent thinking. There are various ways of generating solutions. One is trial and error. One could try a solution, and if that does not work, other solutions can be tried as well. If, for example, one cannot talk to his or her parents to ask for permission, one solution would be to ask somebody else to ask permission in his or her behalf. If that solution does not work, then one can try other ways. Another would be to come up with a list of all possible solutions, starting from the easier ones to the more complicated. Or one can rely on heuristics or a variety of rule of thumb strategies. What is important here is that you use of the creative and imaginative power of the mind. Nabulol pa ako doon. Evaluating solutions. The next stage in solving a problem is evaluating the solutions and coming up with the final solution. In this step, one tries to apply his or her knowledge and the rules of logic and attempts to narrow down the possibilities to one that is most appropriate or effective. The mind converges on the most appropriate solution. This is called convergent thinking. In solving difficult problems, people often alternate between these two modes of thought, the divergent and convent modes. Initially, one may think of possible solutions. He or she then evaluates the solution or tries the solution, and when initial solutions are not working, they are discarded as inappropriate. Therefore, additional divergent thinking becomes necessary to conceive the new possibilities. While some solutions are easy to evaluate, some solutions may be difficult to evaluate, especially if the problem has not been clearly defined. Ang daming S. Applying the solutions. The next step is to apply the solution to the problem. Once the solution has been finalized, the next step is to apply it. If, for example, you think asking someone to ask permission from your parents in your behalf is the best solution, then you do it. It is important to constantly assess the progress of the application of the solution and to be ready to modify it if needed. If that solution does not work, then additional or other solutions must be generated. Critiquing given solution through dialectics. Dialectics in this context is the critical discussion about certain things. In problem solving, it is applied to the solutions or alternative ways of dealing with a problem. Critical discussion involves questioning certain thoughts or ideas, even the ideas of the one looking for the solution. Philosophy thrives in constant criticism and questioning. This is done by way of dialectics or discussions of the pros and the cons of one particular topic, issues, or action. Truth and theories of truth. Truth is the proper aim of any inquiry, particularly scientific and philosophical inquiry. People study and investigate because they want to find out or discover the truth and be able to attain it. By attaining the truth, people are also able to achieve their goals. But what is truth? What are the conditions by which people can say something is true? Is the mind capable of attaining the truth? And if it is, how do people attain the truth? The following are the philosophical theories about the truth and how it can be attained. Realism. Realism is a general theory about truth which asserts that the mind can know certain, fundamental, and immediate truths. When one judges an object, he or she is aware of his or her intellectual capacity to know the truth. For the realist, truth is the conformity of the mind with reality. It is the conformity between the knower and the known. One can claim that he or she knows the truth if there is conformity between facts and his or her ideas. For example, one can say the truth about the nature of the sun if there is conformity between what he or she knows about the sun, that is, the sun as as the center of the solar system, and the fact that the sun is the center of the solar system. There is truth when one says, "Today is Monday," if indeed it is a Monday. This general notion of truth becomes the basis of another theory known as correspondence theory. Ideas are true if they correspond with reality. Realism is opposed by skepticism, which asserts that the human mind is incapable of attaining the truth. The human mind is prone to error. It is unreliable, and because the mind is unreliable, the proper attitude is the suspension of judgment. Skepticism may not be a theory of truth, but it undermines one's ability to attain the truth. The mental attitude of skepticism is doubt.
What is realism? Realism in philosophy refers to the view that the reality of any material objects exists in the external world independently of the human mind. Put differently, realism holds that what one perceives is real and is out there existing in concrete reality. For example, the maple tree that I see with my naked eyes is existing in concrete reality and is not just an abstract concept produced by the mind as the idealists would have us believe. Hence, the fact that the maple tree exists in the external world and has properties of its own, such as hardness and thickness, that maple tree is independent of anyone's perception. It is therefore real. Contrary to nominalism, which holds that universals do not exist independently from particulars, realism holds that both universals and particulars exist independently from each other. On the one hand, in metaphysics, the term particulars refers to the concrete spatio-temporal entities or objects, such as a tree or a book. Oftentimes, the term individuals is used interchangeably with particulars. And one of the most distinctive characteristics of particulars is that they cannot be in more than one place at the same time. For example, if a specific maple tree is existing in a specific time and place, it cannot be in another time and place at the same time. On the other hand, the term universals refers to the properties or characteristics possessed by a particular concrete spatio-temporal object, such as color or hardness. For example, the whiteness of a book can also be instantiated in the whiteness of a dress or a paper. Scholars in philosophy believe that it was Aristotle who first popularized realism when he opposed Plato's idealism and argued that the real exists in the sensible world, which can be known through experience. As we can see, it was Aristotle who provided the fundamental structure and development of realism and its penetration in other disciplines, such as in arts and politics.
Relativism theory. According to relativism theory, truth as the object of knowledge cannot be known as it is in itself. It can only be known as it is modified by a person. This means that truth is always dependent on a person. Truth, then, is subjective and therefore relative to the perception of the subject. What is truth for one may not be truth for other individuals. For example, one may say that the reproductive health bill is the true solution to the country's population problem. Others, however, may disagree and say that is not the solution or the true solution to the problem. Others may say that humanity's true destiny is to enjoy eternal happiness in the company of God. Others may say that humanity's true destiny is here on earth.
What is ethical relativism? Ethical relativism, or moral relativism, is the view that ethical or moral values and beliefs are relative to the various individuals or societies that hold them. Thus, according to the ethical or moral relativists, there is no objective right and wrong. This means that what is right for one person is not necessarily right for another. or what is right in some circumstances is not necessarily right in another. There are two forms of ethical relativism, namely personal or individual ethical relativism and social or cultural ethical relativism. On the one hand, personal or individual ethical relativism holds that ethical judgments and beliefs are the expressions of the moral outlook and attitudes of individual persons. Hence, for the individual ethical relativists, there is no objective standard of right and wrong inasmuch as the individual person is the basis of moral judgments. The ethical relativist may, therefore, say, I have my own view and you have yours. Neither my view nor yours is better or more correct. Let us take, for example, sinicide or geronticide, that is, the abandonment to death or killing of the elderly. There was a common belief that during famines or other extremely difficult situations, the Inuit or the indigenous people of Northern America would leave their elderly on the ice to die. If this is indeed the case, the individual relativist would say that no one, especially the outsiders of this culture, has the right to say that the Inuit are wrong, because the morality of such action depends entirely on the individual Inuit beliefs. Hence, in individual ethical relativism, any person has no right to say that others are correct or incorrect, since to do so would assume an objective standard of right and wrong. As we can see, this example is considered an individual or personal ethical relativism because it is the individual that is the basis of moral judgment. On the other hand, social or cultural ethical relativism holds that ethical values and beliefs vary from society to society, and that the basis of moral judgment lies in these social or cultural views. Thus, in determining the rightness or wrongness of human actions, one must base it on the norms of a particular society. Let us take, for example, the ancient Indian practice of sati. As is well known, the ancient Indians had the practice of burning the wife alive in the funeral pyre of her deceased husband. Whatever the reasons behind this practice, the act was seen as heroic. In fact, records show that some wives willingly allowed themselves to be burnt alive on their husband's funeral pyre. Indeed, if an outsider is to judge this act, she may view this as immoral, especially if she is a Christian. But for the social ethical relativist, that might be the right thing to do in that particular culture. This is because for the social ethical relativists, no society's view is better than any other in a transcultural sense. Hence, no society has the right to say that particular culture of a certain society is wrong. From what we have presented, we can draw three possible reasons that support ethical relativism. First is on the diversity of moral values. The ethical relativists may have argued that the presence of disagreements on many ethical issues or even on basic moral values or principles will prove the point that we cannot attain objective truth. Hence, the idea of objective right and wrong is inconceivable for ethical relativists. Second is on moral uncertainty. Because of moral uncertainty, the ethical relativists would have argued that Because there is great difficulty in knowing what is the morally right thing to do or believe, then again, we cannot attain objective right or wrong. Third and last is on situational differences. For the ethical relativists, the situations and life of different people vary so much that it is difficult to believe that same things that would be right for one would be right for another. Hence, what is right or wrong for one may not be necessarily right or wrong for another. That's it for now. Thanks for visiting us today for another whiteboard discussion here at Philo Notes. Full transcript of this video is available at philonotes.com. And to keep you updated of our newest videos, simply click here and subscribe and tap the bell for notifications. Thanks. Take care.
Pragmatism theory. According to pragmatism theory, which was proposed by William James, the truth is consequential in nature. The real norm or criterion of truth is its consequence or result. An idea or something is true if it can show its consequence and use. That is, it has practical consequences. Thus, the ultimate criterion of truth is its consequence in action. The criterion of truth is utility, workability, or satisfactory consequences. What works in practice will decide which of one's beliefs is true. For example, when a person who is lost in the forest is deciding on which path to follow to be able to get out of the forest, he or she will look at the true path that will help him or her get out of the forest. Therefore, the true path will be the one that will have useful or practical result. Nabulol din ako. Correspondence theory. According to the correspondence theory proposed by the logical positivist Bertrand Russell, truth is in what is said in the propositions uttered. A proposition is true if it corresponds with the state of affairs or with facts. The proposition, the ball is red, is true if it corresponds with the fact that the ball is actually red. Thus, for Russell, the nature of truth constitutes inner correspondence with fact. Coherence theory. This theory developed as a reaction to the correspondence theory. It asserts that truth cannot be asserted of one proposition only in isolation from other propositions. Truth belongs to a system of propositions, a set of propositions that cohere with one another. If the statement, the ball is red, is true, then it must also be coherent with the propositions like, an apple is red, a red ball is different from a yellow ball, and a red ball can be used as a decor in a Christmas tree. Francis Bradley, the main proponent of this proposition, or of this position, maintained that the coherence theory is better than the correspondence theory because it is more consistent. Truth as value. Aside from these theories, there are some philosophers, mainly existentialists, who assert that truth is not purely intellectual and speculative, and it is not purely based on analysis. Truth is not just an object of the mind or intellectual speculation. Truth is also a matter of conviction. Truth is a value that gives meaning to one's life. As a value, one can live and die for the truth. People commit themselves to the truth. For example, those who are fighting for reforms and freedom in society are also fighting for the truth. But the truth that they are fighting for is not an intellectual object or some object that is only appreciated by the mind. They are not fighting for the truth if the issue involved is the sun being the center of the solar system or a path is the one that will lead him or her out of the forest. People fight for the truth because it has value which is associated with justice and peace. Many legislative investigations are carried out in order to know the truth about certain anomalies because for, because for them it is important that the people know the truth. The truth that they are searching for cannot be simply cannot simply be categorized under correspondence or coherence theories. For example, when Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he did not mean truth as a mental object, but truth as a value. Nabulol ako doon. Skepticism, doubt, and opinion. According to the skepticism theory, the human mind can never attain the truth. The human mind is unreliable because people are prone to error, and that there is a prevalence of error over truth. In other words, error undermines the truth. There are more errors than truth. The mind commits mistakes and arrives at falsehood than truth more often. Since the mind cannot attain certainty about things, so the proper attitude must be the suspension of judgment. Doubt. Doubt is a state in which the mind suspends its judgment or assertion on the truth of a certain proposition or belief. When one is in doubt, one suspends his or her judgment about a particular position or idea, or which of two ideas or positions to take. Doubt is either positive or negative. Doubt is positive when the evidence for and against a proposition is so equally balanced as to render decision impossible. When deciding whether or not to go on a vacation and the reasons for and against are equal or are of equal weight, one suspends his or her decision. When choosing between two courses in college, such as commerce and engineering, one suspends his or her decision if he or she finds out that the two courses are of equal weight in terms of guarantee of future employment after graduation. Doubt is negative if there is absence of sufficient evidence on either side. If one does not have sufficient reason to decide whether or not to take commerce or engineering, then he or she suspends his or her decision. Doubt could also be either prudent or imprudent. Prudent doubt is based on the reasonableness of the suspension of assent, while imprudent doubt is based on the unreasonableness of the suspension of the assent. Assent means belief or just judgment. For example, if one does not have sufficient basis or reason to accuse somebody of a crime, then it is prudent to suspend belief. But if one has sufficient reason or basis in his or her belief and yet suspends his belief, then this is imprudent doubt. Doubt could also be either theoretical or practical. Doubt is theoretical if it is concerned with the subject matter of either reason or faith. If the object of doubt pertains to the object of reason, like, for example, the doubt about whether or not the theory of evolution is true, then the doubt is theoretical. If the object of the doubt pertains to the object of faith, like, for example, the doubt whether there is life after death, then the doubt is also theoretical. A doubt is practical if it is concerned with conduct. If the object of the doubt pertains to a certain course of action or conduct, for example, the doubt whether to follow the natural family planning method or the artificial method, then it is a practical doubt. It should be understood, however, that doubt is a purely subjective condition, which means that it is a state of one's mind which requires one to judge facts and make a decision. Now, when one makes a statement about something which he or she is not certain of because of lack of reason or absence of solid basis, there is a possibility of error. Because of this, one may be said to be simply stating an opinion. An opinion is a statement about something without sufficient basis or sufficient reason. It could be true or false. For example, one can express his or her opinion that the cause of corruption in this country is overpopulation. Such statement is only an opinion if there is a sufficient reason or basis for it. Of course, the one giving the opinion is almost certain that what he or she is saying is true. So, stating an opinion is different from harboring doubt. One who expresses an opinion expresses a judgment or belief. One who doubts suspends his or her belief. So, there are those who say that no matter how hard one strives for the truth, there will always be the possibility of error or doubt. One can always disagree with the truth, and this has been shown in many theories about the truth. This position suggests that although one cannot fully know the truth, one can at least approximate the truth. One has to accept the possibility of error and disagreement because the truth is imperfectly grasped by the human mind or intellect. It does not mean, however, that one cannot say or attain the truth. Thus, the proper attitude is not one of absolute certainty or total doubt, but of caution. A person can approximate the truth, but how does he or she do this? How does he or she attain the truth? Philosophical reflection, as discussed before, has shown us how to attain the truth. To sum up, philosophical reflection is an examination about the existential and practical issues in life. The ultimate end is to find the underlying meaning and reasons behind our life experiences. Philosophical reflection is related to critical thinking. In critical thinking, there are necessary mental attitudes and conceptual tools needed in order to philosophize. The aim of critical thinking or philosophical reflection is to arrive at the truth and avoid error. Philosophical reflection can be applied to one's practical concerns, especially when it comes to solving practical problems. Problem solving is not just executing a well learned response to a series of behavior. It generally involves certain logical steps or stages. These stages are representing or defining the problem, generating possible solutions, evaluating how well a given solution works, and applying the solution and critiquing given solution through dialectics. Truth is the proper aim of any inquiry, particularly scientific and philosophical inquiry. People study and investigate because they want to discover the truth and be able to attain it. But there are different theories about the truth. Skepticism states that the mind cannot attain the truth because it is prone to error, and therefore one needs to suspend his or her belief. Skepticism is based on doubt, the state of mind when it suspends judgment or assent on something because of the possibility of error. Even with the possibility of error, one can still express an opinion. An opinion is a statement without sufficient basis or reason, and therefore can either be true or false. This is chapter 2.